In the spring of 1869, there were 5 lives drawn together between mercy and violence, exploitation and greed, and between marginalization and victimization. One of the characters, May Lee, her name is, she survives the horrors of human trafficking and she fights her way to freedom. May Lee was the daughter of a Chinese railroad worker who was killed while drilling cliffs for the railroad. Her contemporary, Hauzini, an Apache woman, also endures pain of marginalization, exploitation, and hardship. Husky is another character. He is a Navajo survivor of the long walk of the Diné. He is dismissed from the first U.S. Army service for following his moral conviction. War veteran Levi Jones and Sheriff Hank Albright are the deputy and the sheriff of the town, and they hold the moral standards. Epic in scope, yet intimate in consequence. It is a Western from a different perspective, where redemption is earned and love becomes an act of resistance. My name is Neelu, and you are listening to Consciousness Lab, where we deconstruct the absurdities of human behavior. Today, we are turning our conversation toward a historical fiction manuscript titled The Weight of Lead. Michael Lewandowski, author of this manuscript, is here to enlighten us about the untold history of the American West. Michael has spent the past 45 years working as an artist, and he is now bringing that creative experience into writing. The Weight of Lead is his first book-length manuscript. Michael, welcome. We are grateful for your presence here today.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Michael, you told me that you already completed and finalized your manuscript. When can we expect to see it in the market?
I recently finalized the manuscript, and now I'm searching for publishers.
Okay, so that is the next step, finding a publisher. Tell us about the manuscript.
The Weight of Lead follows 5 main characters whose lives reveal a violent and morally fractured West in 1869. At the heart of the story is May Lee. She's the daughter of a Chinese railroad worker who's killed while drilling into a cliff to lay track for the railroad. She's left alone, and that vulnerability pulls her into human trafficking. From that moment on, survival became everyday struggle. Through that same trafficking network, May meets Hauzini. As a woman belonging to Apache people, Hauzini's life has already been shaped by displacement and forced removal. Her value as a human being did not matter. Her dignity was crushed every day. And her desire, needs, wants were erased, and her existence became invisible. May and Hauzini shared a common thread of pain and suffering. They meet as 2 women who know what it means to be uprooted, to be treated as expendable. Their bond grows out of shared courage. It's instinct, really, that draws them together. 2 women who are being held against their will. They come from completely different backgrounds, but they both know they were not going to let anyone exploit them. From that recognition grows something spiritual and unbreakable. So, in a frontier driven by profit and conquest, their loyalty becomes the moral center of the story. And the book also follows Haskell, a Navajo survivor of the Long Walk of the Diné, Levi Jones and Hank Albright, both Civil War veterans. They struggle to carry the psychological weight of organized violence into a fragile frontier town. When Hank deputizes Haskell, the moral direction of that town begins to change. The story moves from railroad camps and desert trails to brothels and courtrooms, exposing the hidden cost of progress, lead poisoning, and exploitation, displacement, complicity. At its core, it's a story about moral courage. Love and loyalty in this story symbolize the acts of defiance. This is the context of the manuscript. I'm sure publishers will have their input, which I am open to.
Wow, that's very interesting actually. How did Mei Li emerge as the central figure in your manuscript?
Well, as I researched Chinese railroad workers, men hanging from cliffs, carving granite by hand, crossing oceans under debt contracts, living segregated lives, and often dying without record, I began to see a pattern of eradication. So, placing a 19-year-old Chinese woman at the center of the manuscript was rooted in their commitment to restoration. In many Westerns, the story belongs to the solitary male heroes. It's about guns, reactions, and violence. But by centering May at the heart of the story and by allowing her bond with Halzini to shape the emotional core of the book, that's just something I wanted to do to make it different than every other Western. And what was essential for the storytelling was what moved me the most while writing these characters was the grace and endurance to pain and the courage to move forward against all odds. Did their tragedy move me? Absolutely. The Western literature has often celebrated solitary endurance. May and Halzini suggest something else. That survival can be shared, that dignity can be mutual, and that the tenderness freely given can be a form of power. Even in brutality, humanity insists on itself.
It makes me wonder how deeply we, as a society, have normalized harmful structures. I would be interested to see how this idea unfolds in your manuscript.
Well, take the mining for starters. In The Weight of Lead, I drew from historical information to build the context of the working condition of the miners. The book depicts lead minings, it's dangerous and poorly regulated. Profit comes before safety. I mean, men are breathing poison, and it's treated as the cost of doing business. So, what starts as opportunity, it slowly turns into normalized harm. The town depends on the mine, families depend on wages, and after a while, no one even calls it abuse. It's just called work. And if we're honest, we see that today. Workers in unsafe conditions, communities living near pollution because jobs are scarce, corporations chasing quarterly earnings while long term damage just fades into the background. We call it economic necessity, but over time, the damage just seems to blend in. Then there's the steady destruction of indigenous lives. In my view, frankly, it was genocide. In the story, displacement and forced removal are not just dramatic events, they become daily reality. Government policy just becomes routine, and that routine becomes accepted history. The injustice isn't always loud, but it is built in to our conscience. That feels familiar. Underfunded reservations today, still they're breaking treaties, land disputes, and school curriculum. Certainly, they soften hard truths. Public memory that celebrates expansion forgets who paid for it. The absence becomes normal. And human trafficking, well, that's another one. The network operates openly, but the coercion behind it is ignored because it serves economic and social interests. Men and women who see themselves as decent benefit indirectly. Leaders look away, but the suffering of the woman, it fades into the background because exploitation is profitable. And today, exploitation still hides in plain sight. There's legal gray areas, online platforms, migrant labor systems. Communities benefit while distancing themselves from the cost of it all. Respectability makes coercion. Silence protects comfort. And then there's racial hierarchy. Sometimes in the book it's loud, and other times it's quiet. But it's always shaping who is believed, who is protected, who is dismissed before they even speak. The danger isn't only hatred, it's assumption. But that's not uncontested. There's a moment in the story in court when Halzini is reduced to something less than human by the justice of the peace. And Levi simply says, it is wrong. He doesn't perform, he just names it. The system is bigger than him. He knows this. But the town is comfortable with all this exploitation. But a few people refuse to accept it as normal. Levi and Hank are a part of that minority. And we see the same pattern today. Disparities in healthcare, disparities in education and housing and prison sentencing. Few people stand up and defend inequality outright, but the patterns are there. Bias is built into systems. It feels inherited, procedural, it's impersonal, and because it doesn't always shout it out loud, it just settles in. And maybe the most dangerous structure of all is moral fatigue. In the story, even good men get tired. After enough violence and loss, the temptation is to harden, to just say, well, that's just the way things are. That fatigue becomes its own structure. It keeps injustice in place because resisting it feels costly. Today, that shows up as disengagement. There's news overload, cynicism, the sense that nothing will change. People who care begin to withdraw because outrage is exhausting. And when attention drifts, systems just stay in place. Indifference becomes the ally of injustice. That's what the book is really wrestling with. Not sudden evil, but slow normalization.
You talked about how these themes of harmful structure still resonates in the present day. Where do we see that connection most clearly in your characters?
Well, if you look at the five main characters, each one is harmed by these structures in a different way. For May, exploitive industry isn't theoretical. It kills her father. The same system that calls itself progress leaves her unprotected and vulnerable. When she's pulled into trafficking, the town's willingness to look away becomes a part of her danger. Racial hierarchy decides how seriously she's taken, if she's taken seriously at all. For Halzini, the destruction of her people is her lived experience. Eradication, displacement, suppression, whatever you want to call it, is her lived experience. Displacement, suppression, and being treated as expendable is her everyday reality. The world assumes she's unprotected, and that assumption makes exploitation much easier. She has every reason to withdraw, but she chooses connection with May instead. Haskell carries the long walk with him every day. He's already seen what happens when institutions normalize genocide. So when he encounters corruption or exploitation, he recognizes the pattern immediately. His greatest struggle is resisting moral exhaustion. Walking away and being dismissed from the army is his refusal to accept what others call necessary. Now, Levi and Hank experienced this tragedy differently. They are not the first targets of these systems, but they are forced to stand behind them. But they do it from their own free will. The mine poisons men legally. Trafficking and black market trade hide behind respectability. Racial assumptions shape law and order. So it's the systems that present itself as normal, even necessary. Levi and Hank are not loud men. They are steady men that work with restraint. They understand that the machine of expansionism, profit, manifest destiny is bigger than they are. They become pillars of decency in a place where decency is inconvenient. They put themselves out there by taking risks to protect those at the edge of society like May, Halzini, and Haskell. And that costs them. Because in a system designed to reward compliance, resistance does not come with applause. It comes with pressure, isolation, and the risk. Levi and Hank are men who choose integrity when it would be easier just to look away. And sometimes that's the most radical thing a person can do. So each character, in their own way, has decided whether they will normalize the weight or refuse it.
Well, this does not feel quite like a conventional Western. What led you to approach the frontier through this lens rather than through the traditional mythology of the genre?
The story originally was born from outrage. While researching Kit Carson's campaign against the Navajo, that's when I discovered the Long Walk of the Diné, the forced removal of up to 10,000 Navajo and 500 Apache people to Bosque Redondo, New Mexico. And this took place between 1863 and 1866. So families were just marched, forced to walk for hundreds of miles. You had starvation, exposure, disease. And there's a story of a pregnant Navajo woman who was shot simply because she could no longer continue to walk. So, this pregnant woman symbolizes the history of genocide. And making this woman Haskell's sister in the story, this personalizes it. And I realized this chapter of history, unlike others, has not been fully integrated into the American conscience. It was not merely neglected, it was muted. That silence just felt consequential.
Brilliant. When you read about the long walk of the Diné, what moved you personally?
When I first read about the Long Walk of the Diné, something inside me just changed. Kit Carson, to that point, had existed in my mind as a kind of a frontier figure, almost mythic like Billy the Kid or Annie Oakley. But his scorched earth campaign by the order of Henry James Carleton just stuck with me. So his name, Kit Carson, is just like a name woven into folklore. I knew about the Trail of Tears, many Americans know, but I had never known about the Long Walk of the Diné. So learning about it, it wasn't simply educational. It was like destabilizing. I was struck by the scale of it, the forced removal, included starvation, and the men, the women, the children, all who died because they couldn't walk any farther. I found myself asking how many of these episodes exist in our history that remain peripheral to the national narrative. What unsettled me the most was not necessarily the brutality, but the silence surrounding it. We don't teach about this in schools. Nobody really knows. But as a child, I often found myself instinctively sympathizing with Native characters, like in movies and books. But that instinct wasn't understanding really what the truth was. The long walk transformed that instinct I had into what I felt was just responsibility. So there came a moment when I felt that ignoring this, it was kind of a participation in the silence. Writing this story was an act of acknowledgement. Perhaps it was audacious to believe I could contribute to that reckoning, but I felt compelled to do so. Some stories just insist on being told, and I found it necessary. So it was more of finding it necessary to do this than just pure ambition.
The title, The Weight of the Lead, carries resonance. What does it signify?
Well, the title came from two thoughts coming together. While I was researching lead miners who were slowly being poisoned while companies just hid the truth about lead, the poisoning of lead. There's lead in the rock, lead in the dust, lead in their blood, and silence protecting profit. At the same time, I was reading and revisiting Civil War battles, Monocacy, Petersburg, where and Wilson's Creek was another part of the story. But these men carried bullets made of lead and paid the price with their lives. The word began to mean more than just metal. It became a symbol. Lead is poison. Lead is ammunition. Lead is a burden. Lead is the moral weight people carry when harm is ignored or justified. So the word weight is physical in the story, but it also has the weight of responsibility, hence the weight of lead.
Great. Now, who is your target audience?
My target audience, that's a good question because it starts with, I believe, readers who crave authenticity over standard run-of-the-mill use of language and storytelling. There are a lot of readers who feel like modern novels all start to sound the same. The rhythm is familiar, the voices are all smoothed out, and everything really just moves too fast. They can feel polished to the point of losing any type of texture. The Weight of Lead invites readers to reconsider language itself. I deliberately wove timeless prose with authentic 1869 vernacular. The narration remains clear and enduring, while the dialogue carries the grain of the era, if you will. There is music in that speech. There is humor that arises naturally from cadence and context. The characters are not trying to be amusing. It's their humanity that reveals itself in how they speak, how they hesitate, how they choose words shaped by hardship and faith. There is a belief that modern readers require modern language. I do not accept that. Language carries memory. When we honor historical voice with clarity and craft, we enrich the literary form rather than just try to restrict it. On one level, the novel is for people who just love Westerns. The frontier setting is all there, the tension is there, the danger, the action, but it's not merely about gunfights. It's a moral reckoning. It's also for readers who are curious about the parts of history that were just pushed aside. Native history, the Chinese experience in building the railroads, the long shadow of the Civil War. Anyone who wants a fuller, more honest picture of that era would enjoy this story. And beyond that, it's for people who care about how the past still shapes the present. It's about justice, about what happens when systems slowly normalize harm or inhumane behavior. You don't have to be a historian to connect with it. You only have to be willing to look at it closely. So, simply put, it's for readers who love Western tradition but are ready to see it widened, deepened, and made more human.
And what is the takeaway message of The Weight of Lead?
The takeaway message well, when I talk about the weight of lead, what it is really saying, I come back to the idea that the past is not finished. The choices people made back then are not sealed off in another century. They still shape the world we are living in right now. And I keep returning to what we call progress. If progress ignores the human cost, or if it comes at the cost of genocide, it's not progress at all. When profit matters more than people, someone has to pay for it. That is not just theory, that is reality. So the story also deals with silence, right? Because silence protects injustice, it protects cruelty. What we refuse to recognize, what we choose not to remember, does not just disappear, it stays in our system. It carries forward and it shows up later in ways people don't always trace back to where it all began. At the same time, the book stands firm on this: no one is expendable. Every life, even the one history tried to push to the margins, carries dignity. And integrity, in the end, is a choice. Even inside violent or corrupt systems, ordinary people can choose courage or comfort. Those are the messages: clear, direct, human. Above all, I want the reader to feel the weight. The story is about endurance in the face of inhumanity and integrity under pressure. If it succeeds, readers will not simply finish the story, they will carry it with them. And that weight is intentional.
Michael, thank you. Conversations like this remind us what we can learn from the past. We are grateful for your voice. Best of luck finding the right publisher. If you are a publisher listening to this podcast, please let us know in the comment box below. And thank you for listening to this podcast.